All right, welcome back. This is going to be part 88 of my presentation on dinosaurs and man. And last time we were together, we were talking about Charles Darwin. And towards the end of the presentation, I had showed you this slide here, if you'll look at it. And it's this book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle of life. And so now I'll say right now, in our day and time, when you say that second half, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle of life, what is the first thing you are going to think of? You're going to think that of racial, like the human race. Now, I am of the type that says that there is no different races of people. We are all one. There is only one race, and that's the human race. You have what they are called nationalities. There are different nationalities, but there is only one race, the human race. And so now I had stated that Charles Darwin was a racist, and so I think that was a bit strong, y'all. I probably shouldn't have said that. And so, but I do have some very interesting quotes from Charles, and you guys can kind of make up your own mind what you see in these quotes. And so I do want to say that, Charles Darwin himself, may have not have hated certain what we would call nationalities, or in the modern term, what we would say races, different races of people. He may not have hated them, but he sure did have an idea about the races of people. Now, you can use that word race also you can tie that into animal groups and stuff like that. And so, and that very well, what I believe he was also referring to also. And so I did go into some very old dictionaries and look that up. And yes, you can take that word race has a very broad interpretation. Let's just say a very broad definition, I should say. And so I went into some really old dictionaries that I have, and yes, you can put the animal, the animal kingdom and stuff. You can tie that into races, and so it very well could be that when you look at that title. He says the origin of species by natural selection, and then he's got that word "or" in there, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle of life, which basically means the same thing saying it in two different ways. But was Charles Darwin a racist? Did he have certain thoughts about what we would call nationalities of our world? How did he define that? And so what did he see into that when it comes to evolution? And so it's quite revealing. Now, I will say this. I went into this dictionary right here. This is a Webster's dictionary that I have, 1873. It's 151 years old, guys. And do you know the word racism is not in that dictionary? It don't exist. It didn't exist at that time. Or it wasn't used so much that Webster's decided to put it into the dictionary. And so I couldn't find anything else where that word was used at this time period at all. And so it's not in that dictionary. I do own this dictionary. And a little side note, the word dinosaur is not in this book here. And so now this book here, I have this one. This is the one that you'll see right behind me. And so, matter of fact, if you'll just notice right here, this book right here, that's that book. And so let's go. If you'll notice on the screen here, the racism is not used in this dictionary either. And this is from 1935. It's 89 years old. It was not used. And this book, this dictionary here, 1962, Webster's Student Dictionary. Racism did not make it into this dictionary. This is 1962. And so if you'll notice on the screen here, I went online to try to find out when was the word even coined. And it said, now I was able to, NPR had an interesting article that was entitled The Ugly Fascinating History of the Word Racism. And so they did, in this article, it stated that The Oxford English Dictionary first recorded the utterance of the word racism by a man named Richard Henry Pratt in 1902. Pratt was railing against the evils of racial segregation. And so that is the earliest time, guys, that I've been able to get anything on the word, how it was used. And so, and there was some other online dictionaries that stated that they didn't have anything on paper to actually say that the word was actually coined at a certain time. And so, but I did find this out from NPR, and so that they tied the word in, to this gentleman by the name of Richard Henry Pratt. And so in 1902, I don't know anything about the guy. This is just, like I said, something that I found out. And so for topical reasons on the word, that's the earliest time that I was able to find out when it was actually used. But the word racism, when I went into the online dictionary, this is the Oxford Languages Dictionary Online. It said that racism is a prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. And what that means is it's placed in a position of little or no importance, influence, or power. That's what the word marginalized means. The belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. And that's what I'm able to find is that's what that word racism. So before we start taking some quotes from Charles Darwin on did he have any type of racist bigotry against another nationality, we have to define the word racism. What does it mean? And I think it's really important, guys, that you notice that latter end of this definition here. The belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Now the word the evolution as Charles Darwin was actually starting to, I guess you could say, add on to it. He was stating that we actually evolved from apes. Now that's very key when you start trying to distinguish one nationality from another. And what some of the quotes that he has been quoted saying about different nationalities and stuff. You know, you got to think this guy here was the one that really started pushing that we evolved from ape-like creatures. And so now he did take lessons from a John Edmondson, who was a former enslaved man from Guyana. And so he was what we would say a black man. He was a black man. And so, but he was from Guyana. And at one point in time, he was a slave. And so, he ended up becoming a taxidermist and a teacher of taxidermy. And so, again, don't want to go into all that. If you want to find out any more about this gentleman, just again, look up John Edmondson. And so, but Darwin paid lessons to take from him. Now, Charles delighted in this guy. He actually felt pretty strong about him. And this was a quote that I was able to find about Charles Darwin and how he felt about this gentleman, John Edmondson. It says, a Negro lived in Edinburgh who had traveled with Waterton and gained his livelihood by stuffing birds, which he did excellently. He gave me lessons for payment, and I used often to sit with him, for he was a very pleasant and intelligent man. And so that's what Charles stated about this gentleman, John Edmondson. Now, let's go into some quotes that Charles made. He says, at some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. At the same time, the anthropomorphous, that means of a god, animal, or object that is inhuman in form or nature. So this is what he says. The anthropomorphous apes will no doubt be exterminated. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. And so this is words from Charles Darwin. This is his words here that I'm stating. Another one that he has. I could show fight or natural selection having done and doing more for the progress of civilization than you seem inclined to admit. The more civilized so-called Caucasian races have beaten the Turkish hollow in the struggle for existence. Looking to the world at no distant date, what an endless number of lower races will have been eliminated by the higher civilized races of the world. Now, he's not referring to an animal or plant group, as some would argue. This is not what he's talking about. You can clearly see that he's talking about, when you talk about Caucasian, you're talking about the European white, what we would call race or nationality. Going on. He says, it is generally admitted that with woman, the power of intuition, of rapid perception, and perhaps imitation are more strongly marked than in man. But some, at least, of these faculties are characteristic of the lower races, and therefore of a past and lower state of civilization. The chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than a woman can attain. Woo! Whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of senses and hands. Wow. Woo! He goes on, he says, it is indeed fortunate that the law of the equal transmission of characters to both sexes has commonly prevailed throughout the whole class of mammals. Otherwise, it is probable that man would have become as superior in mental endowment to woman as the peacock is in ornamental plumage to the peahen. Okay, lastly, I want you guys to really take note of what Charles says about the Bible and Christianity here. Now remember, this guy went to a Bible college and had obtained a bachelor's degree. He actually got a degree from a Bible college. Now look what he says here. On March 7th, 1837, I took lodgings in Great Marlborough Street in London and remained there for nearly 2 years until I was married. During these 2 years, I was led to think much about religion, but I had gradually come by this time to see that the Old Testament, from its manifestly false history of the world, was no more to be trusted than the sacred books of the Hindus or the beliefs of any barbarian. Thus, disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate, but was at last complete. The rate was so slow that I felt no distress and have never since doubted, even for a single second, that my conclusion was correct. I can indeed hardly see how anyone ought to wish Christianity to be true. For if so, the plain language of the text seems to show that the men who do not believe, and this would include my father, brother, and almost all my best friends, will be everlastingly punished. And this is a damnable doctrine. And so this came from one of Charles, or the autobiography of Charles Darwin. And that's how he believed about Christianity and the Bible. we're going to stop right there. I just thought to give a little clarification on that word race and racism. And so he very well could have been referring to when he was talking about the origin of species, and then the preservation of favored races. It's just a play on words, both meaning the same thing. But he did have an idea about the nationalities of our world and a higher class of races and the lower races and even women. And so, but like I said, guys, this is a guy who told the Bible to take a hike. He kicked the Bible off to the side, and now he's saying that we evolved from an animal. And when you put man into that realm of animals, the origin of species and everything, you can just throw man right on into it. And so, even though he may not have had any words or anything that stated, hey, I'm a racist, or he may have not have hated a particular nationality, he sure did have his thoughts on what he called the lower races, or those that were not as civilized as some that were maybe more civilized. And so he had a direct thought on that eventually they would definitely weed their own selves out. And so again, man without God. Now in Jesus, there is no Jew nor Greek, man or woman. We're all the same under Jesus. There's nobody that's better than the next person. And so is what I'm trying to say. And in Christ, we are all brothers and sisters, is what I'm saying. And there is no what we would call race of people. We're all one race. The human race. And so I believe Christianity pushes that more than anything else. And so evolution would cause us to keep us segregated, keep us apart. Keep us apart, because again, one race is going to be higher than the next race. It's the survival of the fittest. And so, but at any rate, guys, I'm going to let you go from there. When we come back, we're going to close out this rabbit hole. I'm going to fill that hole up, and then we're going to continue on. And so, but you guys take care. I hope the Lord blesses you real good, and I love you. Y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.